All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I am Sandy Hilsenrath. I am a development manager at the chapter. Just a couple things for housekeeping. If you could all keep yourselves muted during the presentation. Any questions you might have, you can enter into the chat box, and I will help to facilitate the Q&A portion of the talk. Just want to say I'm happy to be joined by some of my chapter colleagues you may know. Emily Miller is on the call today, Shannon Dutton, and Stacy DeArchangel. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our new Executive Director, Taryn Connolly.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and thank you, Sandy. I am so excited to see so many faces and still some new names and faces of folks I haven't met yet. Many of you I've gotten a chance to connect with so far on, one Zoom get together or another, and I look forward to the day that we're all back at an in-person event of some kind, connecting in person. I really wanted to kind of kick off the evening by recognizing a few of our board members on the call. I've been trying to keep an eye on the list as folks are tuning in. I know we've got Reggie, Sapna, and Dina, who are all board members on the phone right now. There may be a couple others. If I missed you, I will catch you at the end and make sure to introduce you as well. And we do have a couple of our corporate partners on the call tonight too. I know Essentia Diabetes Care is represented with a couple of employees on this call, and just wanted to say thank you to you for joining as well. This is really an opportunity to provide an update on our research and mission progress. And I wanted to make a point to let you all know that it's your fundraising dollars and donations that are hard at work making our research possible. And, we're really excited to be able to offer this event tonight to bring you up to speed on some of the progress we've seen. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Jonathan Rosen, who's a scientist in our research department at JDRF, where he really focuses on our research that's improving lives for people with diabetes. So I will turn it over to Jonathan now.
Thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I love doing these research updates. Like all of the scientists at JDRF, I'm so passionate about curing this disease and the research that we fund, and it's really a pleasure to be able to tell all of you about it. First step is to share my screen. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you see the PowerPoint? Excellent. Well, then I will just kick things off. So before I jump into telling you about all the exciting research we work on, I want to start by telling you sort of what it is that JDRF does, because I found that even among our very passionate supporters, it's not always clear. So some people think that JDRF scientists look like the man in this picture and we wear gloves and do experiments, but that's not actually quite right. We're virtual scientists. What we do is we sit in the office, or these days in our homes until we get back to the office, and we partner with scientists all over the world working on type 1 diabetes. This includes professors, biotechs, pharmaceutical companies, governments, private-public partnerships, collaborations, consortia. Any person or group of people anywhere who's doing important research for type 1 will find them, look for opportunities to partner with them, contribute funding and other resources, and work with them to move the project forward toward our goal of developing cures and treatments for type 1 diabetes and its complications. Even though the R in JDRF stands for research, we actually do so much more. So the pipeline you're looking at on this slide represents everything that has to happen to get a therapy to market. And it's no small task to accomplish these things. First, a scientist has to make a discovery in the lab. Then we have to do what's called translational research, which is figuring out how to bring that discovery, say, in a mouse, into clinical trials in people. Then we have to make sure that the FDA and other countries' regulatory bodies approve the drug. Then we have to find payers, make payers cover it because a drug is worthless if people can't use it. Then we have to make sure that doctors and people with type 1 understand the benefits of the drug and are willing to adopt it. And then finally, we get to better outcomes, which is what we really want all along. And JDRF is an active participant at every step of this pathway. We're not all scientists. We have regulatory experts with an office in Washington, DC. We have policy experts, business experts, clinical trial experts. We have the expertise in-house to bring what we need to bear on every problem that people face in their quest to bring drugs and devices to market. But being a researcher, I'm going to be telling you about our research. The JDRF research portfolio, meaning the projects we fund with generous gifts from donors, falls into two broad categories. We call them curing type 1 diabetes and improving lives. So curing type 1 is the holy grail. It's our highest ambition, and it's our true goal. And we'll get there. But in the meantime, we're never going to forget about people who already have type 1 diabetes and may have progressed to a point that's beyond the reach of the cures, which may need to come in early in the disease progression to have their full effect. So even as we're laser focused on getting cures, we're keeping our eyes on improving lives also. And in today's talk, I'm going to tell you some highlights. It's going to be a mini highlight reel. Not everything we're doing, just some exciting stuff to give you the gist of it from both of these categories. And then at the end, I'll be very happy to answer questions. So I'm going to start with I promise, just a little bit of biology before we get into the research so everyone can sort of appreciate what the research is all about. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. And like all autoimmune diseases, this means that your immune cells, which are supposed to be attacking bad guys like germs and viruses and bacteria, get confused and attack your own body instead. And in the case of type 1 diabetes, the part of your body your immune cells attack is your beta cells in the pancreas. And the reason this is important is that beta cells make insulin. They're the only cells that can make insulin that then goes into your blood and lowers your blood glucose. So this is why, of course, why people with type 1 who have lost their beta cells due to the immune attack need to go on insulin for the rest of their lives. It stands to reason that in an autoimmune disease like this, where the problem is your immune cells are attacking your beta cells, that there's two approaches to stop this process dead in its tracks. One is an immune therapy, which will put the brakes on the bad guys in your immune system that are attacking your beta cells when they shouldn't be. The alternative approach is to introduce a therapy that protects your beta cells from the immune onslaught. And we are working in both of these areas, and I'm going to show you some exciting progress of both types. And I just want to make the point that these aren't alternatives. And in the end, the most successful therapy may be a combination of the two, so that we halt the immune cells from attacking your beta cells, and at the same time, give your beta cells the boost they need to thrive even in the type 1 diabetes environment. So we'll start with immune therapies. And this is some really, really exciting clinical trial data. And to be honest, I don't work on this drug. This isn't my focus area, which means that every time I'm giving a presentation and I get to come back to it, I'm excited again because I don't think about it every day. This is a clinical trial testing a drug called teplizumab, which is an immune agent, meaning that it's an immunotherapy meant to prevent your immune cells from attacking your beta cells. So what we're looking at here is a graph, and the y-axis is the number of people who did not get to type 1 diabetes in the clinical trial. So the way the trial was set up, a large number of people at high risk for type 1 diabetes were selected. These are people who have relatives who have type 1 diabetes and were screened and sort of selected as people at high risk to progress into type 1 in the near future. These people were divided into two groups. One got the experimental drug and the other one got a placebo, which means something you take instead of a drug to eliminate like ways that you could get better that aren't really due to the drug. It's a sugar pill essentially, although in this case it would have been, I think, a sugar blood infusion. And so again, if you look at this graph, the higher the line is, the more people never got type 1 diabetes. So you want to see the line be high across the, I think, 5 years that the trial went on. And what you can see is the teplizumab line, which is in blue, is higher than the placebo line at every point in this trial. And when the data were last tabulated, the people who received teplizumab in this trial stayed without type 1 diabetes for a median of 3 years longer than the people who got placebo. And this is just an extraordinary result, not the kind of thing you see every day. It's the first time in history anyone showed a therapy could prevent or delay the onset of type 1 diabetes. So we, and then the whole community really is over the moon. 3 years delay, of course, is not the end goal. The end goal is a cure, meaning you never get type 1 diabetes. But I still sort of want to linger on just what this means. I one time had the opportunity to see Kevin Harold, who's a professor and doctor at Yale, who led this study, talk about it. And he used a phrase that really stuck with me. At the time, it was 2 years without type 1, then they kept following people, and now it's 3 years. But at the time, he said, 2 years without type 1 diabetes is a gift. It's not just a meaningless milestone on the way to a longer prevention. I think it's true for any age, but especially if you're in middle school, if you're in high school, if you've just started college, anyone who has type 1 diabetes or loves someone who does, I think can appreciate that 3 years without type 1 is truly meaningful to people. Now I'm showing again this pipeline from beginning to end for new therapy development. And I want to highlight all the ways that JDRF is working to advance this product. So no clinical trial sort of comes out of a vacuum. There's always some amount of evidence acquired in animals and other sorts of experiments that leads to the clinical trial. And in the case of teplizumab, JDRF provided funding for earlier basic research on the drug in mice, as well as earlier clinical trials with teplizumab, which helped gather support for this drug, for this big clinical trial I just described. JDRF advocates continuously lobby Congress to pass the Special Diabetes Program, or SDP, which is a special act of Congress that carves out NIH funds specifically for type 1 diabetes. Thanks to JDRF and our volunteers' success in getting the Special Diabetes Program passed, that funding could be used to support the trial sites for this and other clinical trials. We have also invested in a company called Provention Bio. Provention Bio owns the asset teplizumab and is now bringing it forward in another clinical trial. Our investment in Provention Bio is through an arm of JDRF, which is called the T1D Fund, which is sort of our venture capital part of JDRF, who function like a venture capital firm, but of course for type 1 diabetes related companies. So now we're working with Provention and the FDA to figure out how to move this drug forward. It's not an obvious answer because this is the first disease-modifying therapy for type 1 diabetes that's ever gone this far. We're sort of in uncharted waters. And our JDRF regulatory experts who know the FDA inside and out are working with the FDA to educate them about what this drug means for type 1 and you know, what the clinical needs are and so on. And also working with Provention to help them understand what the FDA needs from them moving forward. And of course, we're not going to stop here. My hope is that if you see me give a similar talk in a year or 18 months, that we'll kind of be able to keep adding bullet points to this continuum as JDRF helps drive this drug and other drugs too forward to market approvals. So that was an example of an immune therapy. And now I'm going to give you a very exciting example of a beta cell therapy, which again is a therapy or a drug designed not to slow down the immune system, but to act on the beta cells to protect them from the immune system. So this drug here is called verapamil. So verapamil, it's possible people in this meeting are already taking it by coincidence because it's a commonly used generic blood pressure drug. And some JDRF funded investigators did some research and had an insight that this drug could be good at saving remaining beta cells in people caught where the type 1 diabetes is caught very early and there's still some amount of beta cells remaining. So we organized a clinical trial and the results are shown here. This graph is sort of different from the last one, so I'll talk you through it. Just like the last one, the horizontal direction is time, so you're looking at groups of study participants over time. But the vertical axis is something called C-peptide. So the idea is that a drug like verapamil is supposed to preserve your beta cells from your immune system. But we don't have the technology. I mean, the world, no one has the technology to accurately image beta cells over time and directly see whether they're being protected or not. So we use a proxy called C-peptide. C-peptide is something that's produced by your beta cells and goes into your blood where it can be easily measured. So the more beta cells you have, the more C-peptide in your blood. And we use that as sort of an equivalent since we can't directly look at beta cells. So in a study where you're looking at how people respond to a drug designed to preserve their beta cells, what you want to see is high C-peptide. And if there's low C-peptide or declining C-peptide, that means the beta cells are dying. So in this study, we recruited people who were recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And despite what must be a very difficult time in people's lives, they were willing to be recruited into a clinical study, which is really such a kind and generous thing for people to do. And in this case, the study was very successful. So what I hope the graph shows, again, it was a randomized control trial, meaning half the people got verapamil and the other half got sugar pill. And what we saw is that at the time points tested, including the 1-year endpoint of the trial, there was more C-peptide in people who received the drug than the placebo, meaning that the drug saved people's beta cells. Now, I know that talking about C-peptide can sound sort of cold and abstract and scientific, but I want to convince everyone that this is truly meaningful for people's lives. The people in the verapamil group who had higher C-peptide also required less insulin to control their blood glucose. They had lower A1C. They had overall improved glucose control, fewer hypoglycemia events, and all of this with very minimal side effects. One advantage of using a drug which had already been tested in many, many people as a blood pressure lowering medication, which through, luck that our scientists were smart enough to figure out also works to preserve beta cells. So just like with teplizumab, this idea for a clinical trial didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of previously JDRF funded research that tested the drug in animals. So the picture on the right is from a mouse study in this publication that we funded. And I mentioned that in people with type 1, you can't directly visualize the beta cells, so you have to use a proxy. In mice, researchers have the luxury of sacrificing the mice at the end of the experiment and actually looking at the pancreas to see what happened. And that's what these pictures are showing. These are mice with diabetes that were either given placebo, meaning without verapamil, or were given the drug. And the blue stain here is the beta cells in the pancreas. So if you look at the diabetic mice that weren't given verapamil, they're sort of a small smudge of blue, meaning few beta cells. If you look at the picture on the right, there's a huge expansion of beta cells stained by blue, demonstrating that verapamil really saved these beta cells in the diabetic mice. And we think that something like this is what happened in the clinical study I just showed you. So verapamil is just one example of a drug that we are supporting research in that can save beta cells in a new onset population. And on the slide, I won't go through them, but it lists several others that we're also working on. So what are the next steps for verapamil? This was what we call a small proof of concept study. Science always has to be repeated no matter what. So the next steps are larger studies to see if we can verify the finding and make sure it wasn't just a one-time lucky event. And also test in pediatric and adolescent populations where, of course, the need for drugs to delay type 1 onset is quite acute. We're also in the early stages of a truly innovative clinical trial where verapamil is being tested in combination with a second intervention, a hybrid closed loop device, and seeing if the two together can work to delay type 1 onset. There's evidence for each individually, and now we're doing a cutting edge trial to combine them, as well as looking toward a fully powered phase 2 study to really nail down this funding and help us develop our next steps. So those were some examples from curing type 1 diabetes. And now I'm going to tell you about some interesting work going on in our improving lives category. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, but it's very important. Even as we focus on cures, we will not leave behind people who already have type 1, and we'll keep developing these drugs and devices and therapies. So within improving lives, there's kind of two categories of projects we support. One is called glucose control therapies. This is drugs and devices to improve glucose control in people who already have type 1, as opposed to the drugs I showed you before, which are to prevent type 1 or to delay its onset or its development at an early stage. So I think the reason why we need glucose control therapies is pretty obvious, but I'll say it anyway. The epidemiological data bear out what people with type 1 already instinctively know, which is that the treatment options available today just aren't good enough. Only 1/3 of adults with type 1 reach their recommended A1C targets. There's still too much hyperglycemia or high blood sugar and hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. And type 1 diabetes management is burdensome. People have to focus on their disease day long to make sure it just stays in the right range. And if you go too high, then you might take a little too much insulin. And then when you go low, you have to take extra carbs. And this sort of glucose control roller coaster takes a toll on people. And at JDRF, this sort of psychological outcomes are just as important as hard clinical endpoints like A1C. Then on the other side here, we have complications therapies. Here we focus on diabetic nephropathy and retinopathy, which means kidney and eye disease. And the rationale is the same. It's apparent that too many people still progress to these complications over time, and we're working on drugs to either delay or treat these complications. So I'm going to give an example of what we call an adjunctive therapy for glucose control. So we have on our radar two different types of drugs for glucose control. One is new insulins. Everyone knows the standard of care insulins aren't good enough. The reason people aren't able to reach their A1C targets and be in range as much as they want to isn't because they're not managing their type 1 well enough. It's because the tools at their disposal aren't good enough. And that's why we work, one, on new insulins, and two, on what we call adjunctive therapies, which means drugs you take alongside insulin in addition to insulin to get glucose control beyond what insulin alone can provide. And the one I'm talking about today is called Simlin. So Simlin is actually kind of an old drug, but many people haven't heard of it. It's the only non-insulin drug approved by the FDA for type 1 diabetes, and it was approved way back in 2005. It has well-documented clinical benefits. It reduces A1C, it reduces how much your blood sugar rises after meals, and it even promotes beneficial weight loss. However, it was never widely adopted for a couple of reasons. And one is that it's extremely burdensome to take. You have to inject it with every meal, but it can't be mixed with insulin, which means that you have to take it separately, which means if you have type 1, you have to take twice as many injections every day. And this was, a deal breaker, understandably, for many people. So JDRF's approach here is to develop what we call a co-formulation, which means a single solution that contains insulin and Simlin, which is a chemistry project. These molecules don't like to be together, but we are actively right now working with chemistry and formulation experts to create a single product that captures both drugs so people can take the same number of injections they're doing already, but get the benefits of Simlin with no extra work. And I want to show you a little bit more, just one graph, about what these benefits are. So JDRF has funded 2 studies, or one of which I'm showing here, designed to simulate what a co-formulation of insulin and Simlin, insulin and Simlin will do for people with type 1. So the whole problem is that this co-formulation doesn't exist. So our strategy for testing its effect was to put 2 different pumps on people with type 1. One pump had insulin and the other pump had Simlin. And this way we could administer both at the same time, simulating the effect of the co-formulation that we'll have in the future. And the results are beautiful for what this co-formulation will be able to do. So this is showing you someone's, or it's an average of many people's blood sugar over the course of a day. And the gray line is people who are only on insulin. And at dinner, the blood sugar goes up, and then at breakfast it goes up, and then at lunch it goes up. I think this is a pretty familiar blood glucose chart. But for the darker line, where people received insulin and Simlin, which is also called pramlintide, there isn't a blood sugar spike at meals. There's less glucose variability, meaning how much the sugar spikes up and down during the day, and is generally just sort of approaching a straight line and staying in range, not much too high, not much time too low. And this is sort of a proof of concept for the drugs we're developing with chemists, where you can combine these 2 drugs into one product for people's benefit. So I'm going to end with just a tiny bit of history. JDRF was founded 50 years ago, and the people we call our founding moms are pictured here. That's Lee Ducat and Carol Lurie. These are 2 people who had children with type 1 diabetes and met in one of their kitchens and decided to do something about it, and started the organization that would later be known as JDRF. And in the last 50 years, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that everything we've accomplished has been because of people just like them. Our donors, our bosses at the highest level of the JDRF boards, it's people with type 1 and people who love people with type 1 that are making the decisions and guiding our strategy. And of course, this description fits many people, if not everyone on this call as well. So I want to thank you for all you do. Your support is indispensable to our mission. I hope that in the examples I gave today, which barely scratched the surface of all of the activity we're seeing in the field, you can see how much progress we're making. There's so much momentum buildup. The clinical trials I showed you couldn't have been done 10 years ago. These sorts of results just didn't exist back then. This is all new. And we have galvanized the pharmaceutical sector. We've convinced the regulators. We're sort of marshaling all of the forces at our disposal to come with us as JDRF and move forward for cures and treatments. There's still so much to do. There's a little bit of a paradox at play, which is that the further you get, the more expensive the research becomes. Clinical trials are really expensive, and now we're a victim of our own success that we have so many projects in clinical trials in the late stage of product development, ever closer to getting people with type 1 drugs and therapies. So I'll just finish by thanking you all again and thanking you in advance for continuing to support us and work with us in the future. Now, all of that said, I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Okay, John, thank you so much. We already have some questions for you. So the first one is, would you expect the co-formulation to work in existing pumps?
Yes, and that's something that's sort of on our radars. We don't want to create a product which many people with type 1 won't be able to use.
I'm sorry, can you tell the question again?
The question was, would we expect the co-formulation that John spoke about to work in existing pumps?
Yeah, and the answer is yes. That's sort of one of our criteria in developing these co-formulations. That'll be important.
Perfect. Has COVID research taken resources from T1D research, or is it creating new research opportunities?
Unfortunately, it has taken resources. I can be honest and say that JDRF was hit hard by COVID. And right now, we can't fund as much research as we could before. It'll come back. We're on our feet. You know, the world will return to normal and JDRF will be up to our pre-COVID levels. But in the meantime, I think it's just so important that we as JDRF do what we can to not lose the momentum we had built up before COVID threw this roadblock at us.
Do you have any more information, John, on the smart insulin you spoke about the last time that you spoke with us? Anything else on smart insulin?
Yeah, I can kind of provide a very quick smart insulin update for the group. And thank you, whoever asked that. Thank you. That's actually my favorite thing to talk about of all of these. Smart insulin is also called glucose responsive insulins, or GRIs. And these are insulin drugs that go into your body and turn on or off depending on your blood sugar levels. So what this means is that if you take a GRI in the morning, let's say you wake up high, you take a GRI. The GRI will bring your blood sugar down to a normal level and then shut itself off so there's no risk of going into hypoglycemia, and then kind of stay quiet in your body until your blood sugar rises again and turn on again throughout the day. So JDRF has been a leader in this field. And you know, the most recent update is that the field has just sort of never been closer. So JDRF's support of academics and small companies working on this has helped inspire larger companies to work on it too. We now know Eli Lilly and Novo are working on it relatively in the last year or two. Novo made a licensing deal that really turned a lot of heads, where they acquired a small company working on GRI, or at least they acquired the technology for hundreds of millions of dollars, which sort of signaled big pharma's commitment to this too, which again was sort of seeded by JDRF. So, you know, the most recent update is that the projects which JDRF has supported are now in preclinical development, including in large animals. And unfortunately, we don't have visibility into the big companies' internal projects because it's their confidential information. But from what I can glean, they have a lot of enthusiasm and are putting a lot of resources into it. So I'm personally very optimistic about smart insulins.
Great. Okay, and we also received some questions before the talk today. So one of them was, with the shift in investments to beta cell restoration, realistically, how far are we away from a working product that can be implanted into humans without the need for immunosuppressant drugs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to be honest, the questions about how long something will take are always the hardest to answer because it depends on so many factors. And when you get into clinical trials, the prediction becomes even more variable. I'll start with providing a little bit of background because this is a topic I didn't get to in my presentation. So I was focusing on ways you can protect the beta cells in a person's body. The other way you can restore beta cells is to bring them in from the outside. And that's what these questions are about. This question is about. And JDRF has historically supported has historically been a leader in this field, which again sort of has brought other players into the field as well, of how do you make beta cells or islets in a lab and then transplant them into someone who has type 1 diabetes, protect the beta cells from the immune system, which we already know is sort of looking for them, and then allow that person to go off insulin because they've been given functional beta cells. And so the question was about how long until we can get one of these therapies without immunosuppression. So the thought is that the first generation product probably will require immunosuppression. And it'll probably be a few years. You know, again, making these predictions is always tough because clinical trials are so unpredictable, but maybe within 5 years, I think is reasonable that we could have a first generation product on the market, which requires some sort of immunosuppression. The second generation is the one you're looking for, I think, where you can take the cells without suppressing your immune system to protect them. And there it's harder to say, but certainly some number more of years. The one thing I want to highlight here is just how much investment this field has gotten recently. This is, you know, just unbelievably exciting. A small company called SEMA received investment from the T1D fund, which again is the venture capital arm of JDRF. Recently, it was announced that SEMA was acquired by a larger company called Vertex for $950 million, which is the biggest acquisition in the field to date and was just jaw-dropping and really signaled just how much everyone is now seeing the potential of this product as we get ever closer. And just one side note, because I love this story, if anyone is wondering why this company is called SEMA, it was started by a Harvard professor that we had already funded in his academic lab. And he used to study frogs. And then one of his kids was diagnosed with type 1. And he eventually changed his whole research focus to a new area, type 1 diabetes. Eventually, a second kid of his was also diagnosed with type 1. And the name of his company, SEMA, is a portmanteau of their names, Sam and Emma. And so this is just one more example of parents of children with type 1 doing what they can to help the mission.
Okay, what is the latest on closed loop pump R&D? The person who posed the question's daughter just switched to the T-Slim, and it is such a game changer, she says.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that. So as background for everyone, because I don't know how much knowledge everyone has on every issue, what we're talking about here is automatic insulin devices. So an automatic insulin device, or artificial pancreas as it's also called, has 3 components. You wear a CGM, which records your blood sugar every few minutes. It transmits the data to the insulin pump you're wearing. And then the third component is an algorithm that makes dosing decisions based on the CGM data, meaning that the pump is smart in its own way and knows how much insulin to put into the blood at any given moment based on how much blood sugar, on what the blood sugar is right then. So the state of the field is that there are now 2 of these devices on the market, one from Medtronic, one from Tandem, the latter that the question asker mentioned. And there are more coming, largely thanks to JDRF investment. The field is open. There's the big company is Medtronic, there's lots of small companies, and everyone is pushing forward new and improved devices. And that's sort of where the field is right now. The final goal, what we have now is called hybrid closed loop, which means it's smart enough to take care of your blood sugar most of the time, but you still have to tell it when you're taking a meal because it can't handle a super sudden rise in blood sugar. So the future goal for these products is something that's called fully closed loop, which you sort of set it and forget it, like you never have to input meals or anything else. It just takes care of your blood sugar. And that's the direction the field is headed in, sort of one improved product at a time.
Great. Okay, so, and I had another question that came in before the talk. It was a 60-year-old woman who was diagnosed with late onset diabetes a year ago. She's still in the honeymoon phase and not on insulin. She's on a very low carb diet and takes 500 milligrams of metformin once per day. Her question is there any way that she could prolong not having to start taking insulin?
Yeah, that's a good question. And unfortunately, we don't have a way. There is not an FDA-approved therapy on the market which can delay someone's insulin needs. We're actively funding research in this area. And the verapamil study I showed is one example, and others too, that eventually people with new onset type 1 will be able to take to delay going on insulin. The only thing I want to add here beyond that is that no one should be afraid to take insulin. And the other thing that comes with that is everyone is afraid to take insulin. This is something we hear over and over again. Type 1 diabetes treatment can be extremely intimidating when you're new to it. And for the question asker and anyone else, I just want to let them know that JDRF can help, that we can connect anyone to experienced people who can, have lived with type 1 and can explain to them all of the therapeutic options, what it's like to live with insulin, the best way to, count the carbs in your sandwich so that you take the right amount of insulin for. All of these things JDRF volunteers are wonderful at. And so, if anyone wants to get in touch with me or other JDRF staff, we can definitely help with this. And then I said that was the last thing. The one other thing I want to say is that we generally encourage people for a second reason not to be afraid of insulin, which is that there's some evidence that starting insulin sooner rather than later can actually help save what beta cells remain by controlling your blood sugar better so that they don't have to do as much work. So that's just one other thing to consider. Oops, I think you're on mute.
I sure am. Okay, I had another question that just came in. Will the new insulin pump move toward a totally closed loop system?
Yeah, that's the direction the field is going in. Again, it's very hard to predict when that'll happen. But in our internal JDRF strategy, we have a roadmap, which we've been very public about, of all of the steps to get to that point. And we're already kind of like halfway through. It started 10 or 15 years ago, back when this was all just a dream. And then first, there were devices that stopped giving insulin, at a certain point to avoid hypoglycemia. Then there were devices that were predictive and could stop giving insulin in advance of getting to that point. And then we got our current state, which is the hybrid closed loop I was describing, which are quite smart. We're going to keep moving toward fully closed loop. And the other point there is that this is a challenge not just for device makers, but also for drug makers. To be able to fully close the loop, it'll help to have faster and faster insulins. It'll also help to have adjunctive therapies, not, I was going to say like Similan, but exactly Similan is something we're considering, which by blunting the amount your blood sugar rises after a meal can also help people close the loop with the right device.
I don't see any other questions. John, I think everyone on the call just joins me in thanking you so much for being here tonight with us and updating everyone on what's happening and what we have to look forward to. So thank you so, so much. I'm going to bring Taryn back on. Taryn, if you'd like to say a few words.
All right. Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, John, as well, for a great presentation, and for all of you for your really insightful questions, and hopefully you found a lot of value in the presentation tonight. I just wanted to kind of wrap up by addressing a couple of things that were brought up earlier. As Jonathan said, you know, JDRF's not immune from the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the entire world. And, you know, we are trying at JDRF to be really strategic about how we're stewarding our donor dollars, constantly reevaluating our research portfolio and making sure that we're laser focused on, you know, taking the biggest bets on the research that's going to move the needle towards achieving our mission. And, you know, I just wanted to reiterate that we're, you know, still focused on supporting our community. Our community support is more important now than ever. The New Jersey Metro and Rockland County chapter is, you know, here to support your needs from an outreach perspective and continuing to drive fundraising dollars to support this work. We're really trying to maximize our resources and be efficient across the organization to leverage our expertise and really be collaborative so that we're one JDRF nationwide and as well as globally. So with that, I just kind of wanted to thank all of you who have already taken the step to fundraise through one of our fall fundraising campaigns, whether that be Ride or Walk or New Jersey Marathon or something else. Many of you are also donors and supporters of things like our local gala, and we so appreciate everything you do. And if you've not yet taken the step to consider engaging in one of our activities locally, please by all means feel free to reach out to the staff. We'd be happy to talk through more of what we're doing with you directly and help find the right fit so that we can collectively work together to achieve this mission and you know, make sure that we're continuing to funnel as much research dollars towards our work as possible. So thank you all for joining tonight and your continued commitment to the chapter, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you again in person soon, but connecting via Zoom and on the phone in the meantime.
Thanks, Taryn. Everyone, for more information, you can always visit jdrf.org for research information, and also John had his email up on the screen. It is jrosen@jdrf.org, so you can feel free to reach out to him personally, and thank you, John, for sharing that information with us. A recording of this update is available on the chapter's Facebook page, so if you'd like to watch it at any point, you can go on to Facebook and watch it again. So again, thank you all for attending. Thank you, John, for being with us tonight. Have a wonderful night, and like Taryn said, just feel free to reach out to the chapter with anything, really. We're here for you. So have a great night.